For over 50 years, boxed wine has waterfalled seemingly endless fountains of booze into the mouths of college kids and concertgoers alike. But as more and more brands have tossed bottles to the wayside, boxed wine has turned away from its party animal past and has made itself into a respectable bourgeois commodity. Today, we're going straight from nozzle to mouth with the history of boxed wines. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel and let us know in the comments below what other uniquely packaged beverages you would like to hear about. Okay, it's time to slap the bag. Way back in 1900, 29-year-old California immigrant Giuseppe Franzia wrote back home to Genoa, Italy, promising a hometown sweetheart $100 if she agreed to marry him, and to use that money to join him in San Francisco. Despite the irresistibly romantic proposal, she said no. While her rejection could have turned into an outright failure for Giuseppe, his proposal soon became the talk of Genoa. Shortly thereafter, 21-year-old Teresa Carrara decided to write Giuseppe herself. While she wasn't the woman he'd initially intended to wed, she told him she'd take the offer in the other woman's place. That $100 offer was surprisingly effective. Maybe her Amazon Prime subscription was set to renew. Giuseppe gladly accepted. Thus, on July 4th of that same year, Teresa arrived in California. At the time, Catholic marriages required a 3-week waiting period, while a marriage announcement was locally publicized. But Giuseppe and Teresa didn't have time for such formalities, and they allegedly bribed a priest into skipping this process altogether. Hey, Vegas didn't exist yet. You had to bribe the clergy. And on July 7th, just 3 days after arriving in America, Teresa Carrera officially became Teresa Franzia. The new couple then moved east to Ripon, in California's Central Valley, where they worked in vineyards to raise money. By 1906, they'd managed to save up enough cash to buy a ranch of their own. The two soon found quick success, and as they grew and sold more and more grapes, the couple was also able to expand their property into a vast 80-acre estate. All the while, they had themselves a bunch of kids, including 5 sons and 2 daughters. Still, Teresa kept at the family business through her many pregnancies. According to family legend, Teresa even gave birth once while out in the vineyard. Once the baby plopped out, she just wrapped it up in a blanket and kept on working, presumably using the bassinet to hold the grapes. When Prohibition kicked off in January of 1920, things only got better for the Franzia family. While wineries across the country had to either pivot or shut down operations, home winemakers were still legally allowed to make up to 200 gallons of wine for personal consumption in any given year. That's enough wine to fill 2.5 750-milliliter bottles each and every day. For some reason, that booze didn't count. Naturally, people flocked to home winemaking, and individual households began buying up grapes en masse, and was similar to the California raisins craze of the 1980s. Soon, hundreds of millions of gallons of wine were made in households all across America, and California grape growers became their primary supplier. For 13 glorious years, these grape growers raked in boatloads of money. The Franzia family likewise spent their increased revenue buying up neighboring farms, growing their estate bigger and better than ever before. Sadly for the Franzias, but amazingly for the rest of us, it became clear in the early 30s that Prohibition wouldn't last forever. It was around this time that Giuseppe retired from work and took a trip back to Italy to visit with family. Left to her own devices, Teresa headed to the bank, where she literally bet the farm to take out a $10,000 loan. She gave half of that money to Ernest Gallo, her son-in-law, so that he could start his very own E&J Gallo winery. The other half she gave to her sons, so that under her guidance, they could launch their very own Franzia wine label, just as Prohibition came to a close. It was the beginning of a true wine dynasty, a winesty, if you will. Thus, in 1933, within months of the 21st Amendment's passage, the Franzia winery became the first to open in Ripon, California. Right out of the gate, the Franzia brand became known for prioritizing quantity over quality, supposedly backing their strategy with the slogan, "Wine for the masses, not for the classes, or the glasses even. You can drink Franzia straight out of the box, like an adult juicy juice." And the strategy worked. They sold 90,000 cases of wine during their first year in operation, but they sold closer to 500,000 during their second. The family was well on their way to success. And it only took a handful of decades more for a certain cola corporation to want in on the action too. When Teresa Franzia died in 1949, her sons continued to run the family business on their own. And by 1968, they'd grown their company into the 6th largest wine producer in America. They then kept up the hard work for another half-decade yet, only stopping in 1973, when they sold the Franzia brand to Coca-Cola for stock valued at $49.3 million. Turns out, there's a lot of money in cheap wine. Meanwhile, an all-new idea was fermenting across the Pacific. Over in South Australia, a winemaker by the name of Thomas Angove was on to something big. His inspiration? Special bags stored inside boxes used by mechanics to hold battery acid, a phrase that is typically negatively associated with Franzia. But since you're fortunately not supposed to drink battery acid, Thomas repurposed the idea for his own existing enterprise. And in the spring of 1964, his company patented the first ever polyethylene bladder, meant for holding wine. These original 1-gallon wine bags would be stuffed into cardboard boxes and then sent to storefronts for customers to bring home. Customers would then have to cut holes in the bag's corners. And unlike today's spouted bags, they would have to clip the bag's corners to reseal them for later. Not surprisingly, this was a terrible idea. Entrusting customers to reseal their own wine bags led to too many big red spills, and the original Angove cask was discontinued shortly after its launch. Even if this first design missed the mark, within its failure was an inkling of greatness. It didn't take long for others to recognize the idea's potential, and soon winemakers across Australia began to improve the design and make it their own. Throughout the rest of the 60s, multiple unrelated wineries developed their own bag-in-a-box solutions, and they likewise created several patented versions with spouts already attached. Soon, these goon boxes with their interior goon bags were sold all over Australia, and a regional drinking game called Goon of Fortune naturally took off. By the end of the 1970s, it's estimated that 2 out of every 3 glasses of wine sold in Australia were from a box. With all this fun happening overseas, Australia's goon boxes soon caught the attention of enterprising Americans, and within the decade, boxed wine found its way to U.S. shores. After the older members of the Franzia dynasty sold the company to Coca-Cola, a rift formed within the family. Fred Franzia, a grandson to Giuseppe and Teresa, upset with his father for selling out, went off with his 2 brothers and started a wine company all his own. Guess he was more of a Pepsi guy. Since the Franzia family was no longer allowed to use the Franzia name, they called it Bronco Wine Company. The brothers then grew this new company in the decades that followed, only experiencing a brief hiccup when Fred Franzia faced federal fraud charges for deliberately misrepresenting grapes used in his company's wines. Under a court order, he was made to step down from the company for 5 years and to pay a personal fine of $500,000. And he definitely learned his lesson. Probably. Once those 5 years were up, Fred got back to it. And Bronco wine not only remains one of the largest privately held vineyards in America today, but its success eventually caught the attention of the grocery store chain, Trader Joe's. Looking for a cheap wine brand of their own, Trader Joe's called upon Fred Franzia in 2002. He's the Winston Wolfe of budget wine. Just 7 years beforehand, Bronco Wine Company had bought up the bankrupt Charlie Shaw label for a mere $27,000. Fred brought the defunct brand to Trader Joe's, and Charlie Shaw soon became a staple among Trader Joe's loyalists, eventually becoming better known under its more affectionate name, $2 Chuck. But let's rewind back to the Coca-Cola sale. Coke's ownership of Franzia didn't last long. While they bought the label in 1973, they sold it just 8 years later, in 1981, to the newly formed Wine Group. It was then that Franzia at last met bag-in-a-box technology, and it was love at first sight. The Wine Group introduced then the Wine Tap, a lighter, more practical replacement for the ever-popular jug wine, the other container of choice for fiscally responsible binge drinking. Consumers ignored the trademark Wine Tap name, though, and much to the Wine Group's dismay, they insisted on calling this all-new product boxed wine instead. At long last, American consumers could slap the bag like their Australian cousins, 5 whole liters at a time. Unfortunately, Franzia, still prioritizing quantity over quality, tainted the image of many boxed wines to come. The product soon became associated in America with cheapo brands, meant to be binged at college parties or hidden away when guests come over for dinner. Despite this stigma, Franzia sales soon took off. And by the 1990s, Franzia was producing more wine than any other single brand in America. The wine group was then able to grow its portfolio, and the company eventually came to own Cupcake Vineyards, Benzinger Family Winery, 7 Deadly Wines, and about 20 other brands, making it the world's 3rd largest wine producer and the U.S.'s 2nd biggest wine company. In the 2000s, many vineyards rose up to face the challenge of a generation, to shake off boxed wine's low-quality image and to build it up as a viable, more cost-effective, and practical alternative to the bottle. Foremost among these were Box, which entered the market in 2003, and Black Box, which started selling its premium wines in 2005. When discussing boxed wine's benefits, the spokesperson from Black Box said that, by boxing their wines, they cut packaging and shipping costs by a whopping 40%, savings that they claimed are then passed on to consumers. What's more, consumers also benefit from boxed wine's longevity. Most recorked bottles of wine should be consumed within a few days of opening, while an already opened box of wine, because it's better sealed off from outside airflow, will last anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. Additionally, boxed wine's more efficient packaging and shipping translates into a far lower carbon footprint, generating about half the emissions during production and distribution as its bottled counterparts. In the years since Box and Black Box both came onto the market, other boxed wine brands have also stepped up to the nozzle. The 10s likewise saw the creation of Prohibitions, House Wine, and Barefoot on Tap, all of which helped build boxed wine into a viable drinking option heading into 2020. And 2020 was a big year for drinking. Between March and June of that year, Franzia alone reported a 27% increase in sales, while the broader boxed wine industry outpaced them with a 36% increase. Meanwhile, Box topped them all with a massive 78% increase in sales. For many in the boxed wine industry, this was just the jolt they needed. Consumers were finally giving boxed wine a chance, and sales have never returned to their pre-2020 levels. While the level of increase seen during the pandemic's first few months was never sustainable, boxed wine sales continued to rise by about 10% year over year, and boxed wine sales now account for nearly 10% of all U.S. wine sales. Still, the OG remains king. Franzia, to this day, is #1 in the boxed wine market, proudly claiming to have sold more wine by volume annually than any other winemaker for well over 2.5 decades. Thanks in no small part to the, let's call them, creative tactics of the Franzia family all those years ago. So while Franzia may still be stuck with the cheap wine stigma of the 80s, some don't seem to mind it. According to Colin Cooney, the marketing director for the wine group, boxed wines have far more brand loyalty than bottled brands, meaning that those who love Franzia are stuck with Franzia, and they wouldn't have it any other way. So what do you think? Have you ever tried boxed wine? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other weird history food videos.